Hello and welcome to another episode of Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. Now, this is the second anniversary month of the show, and I have to say, like the first anniversary month, I was not expecting to get this far, and it's still a continual struggle to really get up the energy and get up the enthusiasm to continue to do this, even though I enjoy doing it. It's the in between where it's like, should I even continue on? And honestly, about the magnificent people always leaving their comments, their questions, and their feedback, I wouldn't. But just knowing that there are people there who still listen and still enjoy it on some level, that just means all the world difference to me. Anyway, let's go on. It's going to be a bit of a long episode. There were some comics that I didn't expect were coming out, so that whole section is really long, and some really exciting news. Perhaps the most interesting part of this episode is that a segment of it is going to be a small spoiler cast for the second season finale of Legion. So I'm going to be going into that show and into the second season especially, and I'll put a time code below to skip out if you don't want to hear spoilers. And also another time code for some news that I'm going to go really deep into, so I'll mention that as well. So both time codes will be below. Starting off with that exact news, we're going to be going over the recently released images from Wonder Woman 1984. So if you don't want to listen to, or you don't want to hear the spoilered stuff, because I'm not going to be hinting at, I'm going to go right into what these pictures show, then look at the time code below in the description and skip ahead. Now, there are two main photos that were released. There's been a bunch of set photos, but two actual still images from the movie were tweeted out by Patty Jenkins, and those two pictures show Wonder Woman herself in front of a row of TV screens, sort of like Ozymandias. It's a very evocative image, and I really like it. It shows a lot of style, and not like the first movie wasn't stylish, but this definitely seems to be showing a nice distinction from the first movie. I don't remember anything just like that in a very striking way in the first movie. And the second image is of Steve Trevor in the 1980s in a mall, and people are kind of outraged that there are hints and intimations that he's going to be back as a character, and I am flabbergasted by that. I really am. But I admit that that might just be my innate bias towards Steve Trevor. I think that he is perhaps the greatest Wonder Woman love interest of all time. I know that she's had a couple, and there are severe droughts in that regard, but I think he definitely hits a great sensibility with her. And to quote Adam Hughes, who was doing or was going to do the All-Star Wonder Woman miniseries for, the All-Star line back in its heyday, the whole dynamic between Steve Trevor and Diana is that they're both sort of outsiders. They're both sort of caught in different places with different ideas of those places than their compatriots have. And so that would draw them together. It's such a great emotional tie and bind that they had. And he also described it like Roman Holiday with Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck. That whole sort of romance story between these two completely distant and disconnected personality and social types. And as you can probably tell, I am really disappointed that All-Star Wonder Woman never happened, because I can tell just from what he was saying and just the general idea and enthusiasm he was getting into it that I would have loved the hell out of that miniseries. But I'm just excited he's back. And that's just because he was such a great part of the first movie, and it's never been like Steve Trevor hasn't been back in some form, even if it's not him. Such as when in the original TV show, Linda Carter, it was his grandson. But it could also be maybe a delusion by Cersei or her own trauma from his death. It could be any number of things, but there's so many people saying, how dare it? It negates her character development if he's back, but how does it? I mean, I honestly don't see it that way, because Wonder Woman is such a supernatural and spiritual focused character. They're gods, there's an afterlife. They definitely leaned harder into making her mythology a lot more Judeo-Christian-esque. So if he's back in some way or some form, it's not like it's beyond the realm of possibility or belief. And even then, if people are still taking Just League into account, it's not like they end up together, which I think would be a shame. I would honestly love it to be Steve Trevor and for them to get together and do that whole Golden Age thing where they're both like living in Olympus, and that's why they're like never aging or some shit like that. It could be any number of things, and I'm not expecting like the world. I'm not expecting like that. And it's very likely, or at least it should be, sort of building up Cersei or something like that. Maybe a Cersei trick to set her up for a trilogy as a third movie villain just to round out very nicely. It's always that mindset. No, I can definitely see it being something like that, something a bit more illusory. Overall, I'm actually pretty excited for this movie. Not that I thought that Wonder Woman itself, the first movie, was so fantastic. I just thought it was entertaining. It was well done and just a nice time to watch. So I'm excited for this one just because I expect another enjoyable time. And that's all you really can say, can you? In other rather huge DC Comics movie news, Geoff Johns is no longer Chief Creative Officer of the DC adaptation side. He's been behind stuff like, or at least been a big pusher for some of the CW shows like The Flash, iZombie, and Lucifer, and all that kind of stuff. And there's even a lot of rather scandalous and notorious rumors about his involvement on Justice League, and that he might have wrestled the script control away from Chris Terrio and actually rewrote multiple drafts of it. Someone supposedly on set, so take that with a grain of salt. So he stepped down and Jim Lee is now in that position. What this means, though, is that Geoff Johns is not completely exiled, but he has no longer the overseer, nor has he all his fingers in so many different projects. The only ones that he still has some degree of control over are actually going to be mostly Aquaman and Green Lantern Corps. And it's been confirmed that he's going to write the script to Green Lantern Corps. So that's pretty interesting because he also wrote at least one or two drafts of the Green Lantern movie. So whether or not he'd be able to learn from some of the mistakes that were done on that movie is left to be seen. Although this does give him a lot more room to experiment with the other characters, because that's one of John's strengths, is with just making these huge kind of cast moments. One of my favorite bits of his run was from Green Lantern Rebirth, where you see all the main Earth lanterns and the huge descriptions of how each of them uses the ring differently and how their constructs are all innately distinct from each other. So something like that. I think that Green Lantern Corps is going to hopefully give him a lot more room to be inventive and creative and entertaining. Most importantly, though, to the comic side news, is that this means that for perhaps the longest time, Geoff Johns is now available to actually write comics. And the two products that have been announced is going to be a Three Jokers miniseries that is going to explain that one aspect of Rebirth that apparently none of the Batman writers ever told or explained, and it's probably because he wanted to do it himself, but I honestly would have given up the ghost on that one and let someone else play around with it. And the second project is going to be finally a continuation to Curse of Shazam, the backup he did with Gary Frank, coming out sometime this fall, artist to be announced. So I would hope someone like Patrick Zircher or something like that, someone who is not Gary Frank but can evoke the same sense of well-honed darks and all that kind of just hard lines that I think really help sell corner moments. I'm just really excited for the last part because I have been waiting. I think a lot of people have been waiting literal years, been maybe around half a decade, maybe even more, that we've seen this story continue. I think the last bit of forward momentum it ever got was the start of Trinity War, where Billy Batson is spreading the ashes of Black Adam, and this starts like an international incident. And that was that one little plot beat. Billy Batson does nothing else whatsoever of importance throughout Johns' JL. And then you also had the Black Adam Villains Month issue that led into Forever Evil, where he finally does come back due to that action. And so it also sets up what Ibak's been doing. Sets up Ibak as a great, he'll be back sort of villain. He's not dead, he's in stasis. Those are the only two things we've seen at all that could possibly be used as plot seeds for Johns to reap in the Shazam series. I know a lot of people are disappointed that isn't Morrison or Gail Simone, but I think that while something like Thunderworld was entertaining, I'm so glad that there was able to be a wait until Johns was free to finish the story, because I found Thunderworld okay, but I wasn't that gripped by it. But with Curse of Shazam, I just find it so entertaining. I find it so much more entertaining. And that's not a knock toward Thunderworld, although I do get a little bit annoyed that people sometimes act like it's the end-all be-all, when it's sort of just an imitation of the Golden Age stories, and the Golden Age stories are actually pretty clever and funny, and it just doesn't capture that heart of it. It's a good sort of facsimile, but that's about it. So yeah, can't wait for that. Can't wait for finally the Mr. Mind Savannah connection, their team up to come around, the Monster Society, all of that. And yet this leads to a third subsection of news that Jeff Johns is going to be curating a pop-up imprint called The Killing Zone for obscure and D and Z list characters that creators want to, or at least that they want to push at least once more. And I have to say, The Killing Zone is perhaps the most direct name you could title a pop-up for this specific purpose. It's like directly telling their fans, yes, buy it now and it's your last chance before you never see them in anything ever again. How much more blunt can you be? And I think a lot of people that I know, at least, are pretty interested in the whole sense of these obscure characters and just how they fit in continuity, and because they're so obscure that they get some really ingenious creative teams on them. It's also definitely where I think the Inferior 5 Peacemaker book that Giffen and Jeff Lemire were working on is finally going to end up, because we haven't heard about that book ever since it was announced. I think the announcement was like the only thing that we had heard about it. I don't think it's been canceled. I think it's been pushed off, and they finally just made this new pop-up imprint that just fits it like a glove. Just banking on the own obscurity of it to push sales. Like, this is so obscure, you gotta get it because it's so obscure, which is kind of hollow, but whatever works. Since it's only a pop-up one, I think it's only going to be used whenever they have an IP that someone wants to write that they don't want to perhaps push as if it were the next big thing when it's not. Like, this is the next big thing, but it's interesting. So, I wonder what's going to end up being on there other than presumably Inferior 5 / Peacemaker. And the last bit of actual comic news is that Tom King is writing the next Crisis event, or at least the next event with the name Crisis in it. I feel like it's going to be like 0 Hour Crisis in Time or Identity Crisis, where they're not explicitly multiversal or huge, grand, sweeping dangers and threats. It's just going to be a metaphorical crisis, or what Morrison termed the crisis of the soul or something like that, when he was separating the main Crisis trilogy with the one that included Identity Crisis, like the crisis of the characters themselves as characters and the crisis of the multiverse. And I have to say that I am not excited about it whatsoever. I'll get into it later when we're going over what I read this week, but Tom King has got to stop. I like The Vision, I like Sheriff of Babylon, I like a lot of his one-shots and short stories, but Mr. Miracle and a lot of these things that he's been promoting with like ideas and with these themes are just becoming samey, and I don't think that it works as well in long form, because then you have something like Mr. Miracle, which is perhaps a huge complete narrative mess and is just reiterating the same points over and over again in a way that is not at all entertaining or even enjoyable. So I just assume that Heroes in Crisis is going to be the same, because it's all about taking these characters and forcing this sense of, oh, see, they were traumatized all along due to these dangers and adventures and actual threats they've been part of, which to me just sounds like the opposite of what Keith Giffen did with Sugar and Spike, that recent backup series in the Legend of Tomorrow anthology from I think a year and a half ago, which was pretty much almost the same concept in essence, except about embarrassment, like superheroes dealing with embarrassing things in their life, and they were called upon, Sugar and Spike, to keep it hush hush. So Sugar and Spike at least sounded a bit more a DC comic than, oh no, remember when I wrote Booster Gold as a complete fucking idiot and now he's completely emotionally wrecked? Well, time to see what he's up to now. Who gives a shit, Tom King? And I'm not ashamed to say it. I will admit, though, that since I admit and I acknowledge that Tom King doesn't not have talent, that he can write, even now, even recent stuff he's written, I still enjoy, that Heroes in Crisis might turn out to be pretty interesting and pretty good. I'm just saying that with this theme and with this content, the odds are against him, because they become so tired and tried all this other stuff that I'll rant about Mr. Miracle with. Anyway, that's the last of the comic-related news. There's been some stirrings and some controversy over the Fox Comcast Disney debacle, but it amounts to people just yelling, no, my megalo corporation deserves this more because the other one is evil. I keep hearing Disney's evil because acquired companies that they lay off, and I hear Comcast is evil because they acquire companies and they lay off. So They're both exactly the same. The only difference is that, honestly, the X-Men will be with the other Marvel heroes if Disney gets them, which is just the most petty reason to want something to go somewhere. I think that the X-Men have been pretty decent and overall pretty consistently enjoyable apart from Disney and apart from the other Marvel properties. So no sweat off my back if they don't go back to Disney. But other than that, whatever the chips may fall. Anyway, with the news out of the way, let's head into what I read this week. And because I know I missed a couple of comics that I actually did read last week that I didn't mention at all, I've actually kept a list this time just so I don't forget anything that I did read and I actually want to talk about. So let's start off with Mr. Miracle number 9. This series is so completely horrible, I don't know where to begin. And I know people will say that it's because I love the Fourth World and I'm very connected to the Fourth World, and this is just a character sort of not bias. And there is elements of that, I will freely admit. But when thinking about it, when trying to really divorce my ideas and what I know of the Fourth World from this comic and trying to treat it as just a regular series and as a story that this creative team is trying to tell, it's still just a complete incoherent mess and nothing flows. It's a lot of regurgitation of the same central themes again and again, and it is slow plotting, and it's so full of its own sense of ponderous and depthy emotion when it's really just all repetition and all very surface level. So what you're ending up with is just a long and uninteresting sequence of events that all just go on and on and on and on again and again. So you have like 3 pages just dedicated to spit dropping on a floor, or 2 pages dedicated to only a static shot of a box falling to the ground, stuff like that. Bookended by some sort of thematic underpinning of, oh, see, it's all about depression. And we get it. We get that it's about depression. It's 9 issues of nothing but depression. I'm depressed. I have chronic depression. This is not interesting. It's not interesting in the least. I know that King, like he said, and this is very personal work for him, I don't want him to undervalue or devalue his own emotional state as well. That's not what I want to do here, but it's just not interestingly told or engagingly told. It just feels like a lot of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Probably one effective sequence and the rest is just complete trash bin material. It's just still the same damn story. It's still the same damn theme being told again endlessly across multiple pages, and it's 9 issues in. So I've heard a lot of defenses like, oh, it's not really real, it's the Omega sanction. But for 9 issues, you can't just hide behind that. You can't just hide the fact that it's the Omega sanction, so of course it's repeating, or anything like that, where that doesn't excuse that it's not going anywhere. You still have to do something interesting, but still the most trite kind of BS. Even if it is the case, and I'm seriously starting to doubt it, because after 9 issues, you think that they would have had something else. There are only 3 issues left of this series, and yet the whole "it might not be a real" thing is directly spelled out in dialogue in the first issue and through multiple issues since then. And there's still been no forward momentum or recapitulation of it. It's still just completely circling around it like it's mysterious, when you can't be mysterious when you actually spell out between characters that it might not be real. It's just a complete and awful and entertaining read. And I just can't help but think that this is going to be just a horrible mess in one go. I don't know how you could read this in one go and think that Tom King is a good writer at all. And I still defend Tom King when he writes something good, but this is definitely not it. So, that was my thoughts on Mr. Miracle number 9. But most of what else I read, I actually pretty enjoyed, like Mage, the Hero of the Night, which is also on its 9th issue. And we finally gotten all the other books in trade form, the new trade form already. So it's definitely in the back half already, and it's really settled into a really nice back half. It's never been the most exciting series. Anyway, Matt Wagner writes a very comfortable and very engaging series and tone here, but it's never been like edge of your seat kind of stuff, and that's why I appreciate it. It's still so thrilling though, especially this series and where it's been doing with the characters and where it's been putting them. And I kind of have like slimmest hope that we see some sort of Mordred type action, and I think this might be hinting toward it, but we'll see. Other than that, it was still a really enjoyable issue. I think I enjoyed number 8 a bit more because I had a bit more sort of like a fan gimme kind of moment, where it's a very clearly a gimme moment, but it was played excellently. and I was grinning like a fucking madman. So that was great. But number 9, it does show that it's taking itself a lot more seriously, a lot more groundedly in the direction that it is taking the story, and I really do appreciate that. It's only 5 more issues to go, but it's going to be 6 more months because there's going to be that skip month in October where the first trade for the first half of the Hero Tonight comes out. So I'm going to be expecting that as well. Red Hood and the Outlaws had another issue this week, and it is still the best Rebirth title, and I know I'm going to catch some flack for that. I'm not saying it's the only good Rebirth title that it doesn't have competition for best, but in my estimation it is just one that I love just because I'm biased toward it. Jason Todd and what Lobdell is doing with him in this series in relation to Bizarro and Artemis. It's just a great kind of trio, and the dynamics and interplay between those three are so well done, and Lobdell is the best Bizarro writer in years. He stands as one of the best Bizarro writers possibly of all time. Even in my eyes, there's only Siegel and Johns and now Lobdell. Those 3 are my prime Bizarro writers. Anyway, so this issue is a really emotional one. Lobdell does some clever trickery where he's trying to keep as much in from his New 52 Red Hood and the Outlaws run in continuity, while also just kind of breathing it out in the whole Rebirth way. So I thought that was pretty fun. The other Rebirth title that I was mentioning that gives Red Hood and the Outlaws competition is New Superman, which had its final issue this week. And this is just a really sad and disheartening, but also very heartening occasion, mainly because of how well this was written as a final issue. It admits that there are plot threads that we are never going to see resolved, but urges that we make peace with it, that we make peace with what came and what was good, and not dwell with what we can't change or what we will never get. So it was really great, and this entire series has been fantastic. It's been such a great series, and Yang has done such great work with it, and I can't wait for his next contribution with DC, which is Superman Smash the Clan, which is based on an old Superman radio serial. So that's gonna be fun, and just to show just what a great and stand-up kind of guy that Yang was to his fans, and to what he knew was just a book that had caught a fan base, even if it was somewhat of a cult fan base where it's small but devoted. He printed out kind of a Superman logo design for Kenan Kong. He's like, please print them out, do a press on kind of thing, and also other things such as just the whole sort of essay to the fans about the ending of it and the series and all these last thoughts for it. So it's been such a great ride, and I miss these characters so much, and so many other titles are getting resurrection like Iceman and Cyborg, and maybe someday we'll see them again. And I hope that when we do, it's with talent who respects them. It's with a creative team who understands and who wants to do the best job possible for them. Speaking of teen heroes, Sideways number 5 comes in, and it's the first fill-in issue. We have no Didio, no Kenneth Rocafort, and Justin Jordan's around, but he's joined by artist Robert Gill. And it's okay. I miss Didio's more hammy and very sort of campy writing style that kind of pervaded the other issues. I think that's his strength when it's on, and it's been on so far in this series. But it was very well done. The characters are still so enjoyable, and it's nice to know that Rocafort's designs can be translated across different artists, which sometimes you're always worried because the designs can be somewhat intricate and somewhat very flourishy, and so they don't look well or any good with another artist, no matter how talented the artist may be. Really what this series is doing, and it's really a great thing that they're doing, is that while they're seeding out a larger arc, each issue has been so self-contained about one villain or one plot point that is going to be seeded later on. So it's very much a montage sort of book right now, and that's to its benefit because it gives it a nice quick pace and already a nice rogues gallery. Some have died, but you still have a lot of build up for whatever may come as a nice solid foundation. Now we get to the Millar twosome. We have Kick-Ass number 5, the penultimate issue of Millar and J.R. Jr.'s return to the series, and Magic Order with Olivier Copiel. So, Kick-Ass number 5, I love this arc, I have to say. It's very much a surprising return to form for this series, even though the main character is completely different. It's not wild and amateurish and insane Dave Lazuski. It's a rather grounded and pragmatic character who is getting into this with a focus and with a very sort of indelible sense of determination. And yet the highlight of this series, to me at least, is the eventual cascading disaster dominoes of chaos and madness and anarchy as the roller coaster ride to destruction in the finale always comes. And that's what this issue is all about. And this series has really sold that and kept that consistent core of the series, that nothing coalesces unless it's disaster and unless it's just completely in disservice to the main character and to like the protagonist. So that's why I enjoyed this about this issue. It's still had that sense of fun and entertaining energy about its craziness. Millar and JR Jr. are going to be off it after the next issue, the finale, and they're handing it over to Steve Niles. So I'm going to just hope that they keep that consistent tone. If not, then I have no problems dropping it. Anyway, with the Magic Order, I have to say it's still very pitchy, and I know that's not saying something with Mark Millar because every single book he does is a pitch, but it's also not as pitchy as some of his other works recently have been. There's been a sweet spot where there are more human qualities to his pitch works that gives him life while also being still entertaining or somewhat blockbustery. And stuff like Chrononauts or Huck or Empress lose sight of that and become nothing but set pieces or just trite themes that never get expanded upon their face value. So I've hated a lot of his, or rather really disliked a lot of his recent miniseries. But the Magic Order, it goes back to that sort of sensibility where there are enough engaging character little beats that check off things on my list that I can kind of see past it and think that, well, it's still kind of hollow and manufactured. It's still rather well maintained and well focused because it has those beats. It has the effort, at least, to try and build this sense of atmosphere and the sense of an emotional quotient. I know people are put off by a lot Millar does and a lot of the kind of hollow sacredness of some of his works, but no, I mean, I lean toward him a little bit more, although I never give him any slack when he doesn't deserve it. And I think Magic Order is so far one of the good ones. All right, so I think that's all I read this week. Oh, wait. Scooby Apocalypse number 25. It's minor thoughts. Shaggy and Velma are finally an item, and it's amazing. It might happen off screen. There's a time jump, and I'm pretty sure it's in the last arc because killing off characters, time jumps, it's definitely in the Giffen playbook of, yeah, we're wrapping up. Let me just rush through it and just create a huge mess of anarchy. So, still a fun series. Many flaws. I honestly still incredibly enjoyed it. And so we head on to the small little spoiler cast for Legion Season 2. So this is going to be the second time code below, so skip to that second time code. Anyway, so this season and this series is probably one of the most ambitious comic book shows ever created. I'm not going to say it's perfect. There are parts where it definitely drags and that it could have been less long-winded than it is, but it's still just a lot of creativity and a lot of ingenuity displayed on screen. And I have to give it props for that. It's still so engaging. And Dan Stevens is such a great actor. He's perfectly cast in this role particularly. And all the side characters, honestly, they are just very fun and just a great crew and gaggle of different idiosyncrasies and oddities of characters encapsulated like that. So I really enjoy it. And the second season is both more straightforward but also less cohesive than the first season. The first season seemed to go out of your way to tell a straightforward story awkwardly and off-puttingly on purpose, while this season tells a even more straightforward story but longer and with more pauses between the actual plot to go into more digressions. And what that amounts to is there is John Hamm in a sort of nature documentary show about the mind being narrated to the audience that takes up like 10 minutes of the episode. And they're interesting, but it coalesces later on. So it's very hard to like see where it's heading into, at least at first. And you also have just entire episodes dedicated to a single point, to making a single point about the core theme of the show or the season. So you have an episode, which is one of my favorites, about different versions of David hypothetically that could exist in the multiverse, and it's all about them, it's all about their lives, and that's it. And the core point of that is what his sister had impact on him and what that relationship meant. So it's a great episode, but it's not something that maybe didn't deserve a full episode just for this one point in this narrative, because it's already feeling the weight of being stretched out at this point when this was made and stuff like that. But I still really enjoyed it. It's doing a lot of things with the second season in relation to the first that I think are pretty interesting, where it's talking more about the aspects of responsibility and culpability or even the mental issues that David does have outside of his conflict with the Shadow King. So I thought that was executed very well when they brought it up, although it wasn't exactly as built up. It felt like we were just so supposed to innately accept it or inherently accept it as a consequence. I think that we all know that David actually had mental issues outside of just the Shadow King messing with his brain. But a lot of what they do to make him seem more evil and a lot more of a villainous figure in his own right outside the Shadow King and just inside of himself, I don't think was executed or built up that great. While the actual scenes as they played out were pretty entertaining and pretty exciting, that was something that I felt was lacking. Although, in general, the second season was pretty fun, pretty interesting. It had a lot of great moments, a lot of great scenes. And I can't wait for the third season. I was somewhat expecting to be canceled, but the third season, I think, will hopefully bring a lot more of this threads to a close or bring it some more sense. Because there was some legwork that wasn't done that I think could still be done in the future just to round it out. Although perhaps two of my favorite scenes in this season have to be just a little mouse getting up and dancing to Slave to Love, or the fact that the finale becomes an actual kind of fucking musical in the very beginning of it, with pretty much the Shadow King and David singing while fighting, and the song is Behind Blue Eyes. Music and dancing and just having a very sort of showbiz quality to it, into the visions and into the psychic powers. It's been a part of the show since the very beginning, since like the very first episode. It's been a stylistic choice that they've continued to use. It's never become and gone over to a full kind of musical style, and that's what it becomes pretty much here, with them actually singing these songs and shit like that. So I really enjoyed that. It's still a fun show, and while I think it wasn't as strong as the first season, it's still insanely out there, and at least not, I don't mean out there in like the basic sense where it's like, oh, it's out there, it's crazy. No, it's out there. It means that it's reaching out to do something. It's reaching out to be a bit more creative and inventive and crazy. Now, I mean crazy like, oh, it's crazy. I mean crazy like it's doing these things that you probably wouldn't expect it to do stylistically or functionally as an episode or as telling this story. So I think that is definitely in its favor, and I really enjoyed this season, even if it fumbles a bit of the character points. All right, so we're heading on to listener questions, and we have two doozies, and I cannot wait to get into them. Our first question is by Govatem, and their question is, what are some comics that I would want to highlight in respect to varying degrees of representation? Just because I've been talking a lot about that, and I know that was a segment of the last episodes and some episodes as well, you know, with my complaints against Miles and all this other kind of stuff. But I think that when it comes to representation, it has to be just another quality. It can't be something like where you add it in and then never refer to it. It has to also be played with, especially in the Marvel Universe where everything's New York. These are ever present. You have entire boroughs and entire sub-boroughs and towns and neighborhoods that are completely about a person's sort of nationality or race and culture. So you can't ignore it either, because that's where immigrants or stuff like that, like my parents, and I was born here, but that's where we cluster around, that's where we live, and that's where we gain a lot of experience from. So you just can't negate it as well. Something like that's what Miles, I believe, does, and that's why I think that Bendis did, by just sort of placing a little name game and then doing an erasure. And then you have the other flip side of that, where you have America, which just kind of bombasts onto the scene with probably the most cliche, stereotypical, and loud representation, and just has the opposite effect. It becomes very almost caricaturish and very racist. So ones that I would like to highlight would be even something like New Superman, which it's in that setting, it's in that country, it's about those characters and their government, and there are elements of that are played very well. They're played to an extent where it makes sense, but it's still enjoyable, and it's still about these characters, and it has an effect on their lives and on their personalities. Something like Aquaman of North Korea, the Dragon Son, that entire mini arc was so well handled, and it's not like it's just that he's from North Korea. No, it plays into that. It's not like the Just Think of China are just from China. No, it plays into that a lot more. It's about that whole cultural influence, about that whole translation between nationalities, and how we take concepts and we share them all in this kind of global mixing pot. So it's definitely all about that, while not losing focus of actually being about characters and making these characters enjoyable and entertaining to read. So New Superman will be one. Sideways, he's an adopted child and he's Hispanic and all this stuff, and it's not like it's a big facet of it, but it definitely does show like how you can be a race, you can be a nationality, but you don't have to be tied down to it. You can always refer back to it. It's not erasing it. And the fact this whole adopted family loves him and all that stuff is very ever present, and it's motivating factor of that whole subplot and with those side characters. So that's pretty good. That's actually really well honed. And if you want something that does play into a lot more, then I would recommend something like Sterling Gates and Andrew Kreisberg's and Jeff Johns' small Vibe run from the New 52. And it was very short-lived, but its genius was that it showed Vibe in that sort of inner city, that sort of urban life where he's not like some sort of super genius, or he's not the most capable or like the most apt for this kind of heroic work. He's not well off, he's not affluent in any kind of physical or environmental or mental sort of way. He's just a product. And so you have him stuck in a dead-end job. You have somewhat of a bummy, almost losery sort of brother, and the only one who's probably going to be successful was their older brother, who was only on that track due to athletic ability. So you have that kind of these pressures of that life and the pressures of them as a family dynamic. And that's something that I think that the Flash show on the CW completely missed, because then you introduce Vibe and he's like a super genius, and then you introduce his scummy, bummy brother, who is still a character in the comic, engaging and interesting one. And the show got around to him. He becomes a genius concert pianist who played Carnegie Hall, and it's like, who cares? Where's the interest of that? It's just like, oh, we're building him up to for what? They're not interesting anymore. They're not like the CW could have made the opposite interesting as well, because the CW is uniformly complete shit, but it still had that sort of quotient of, oh, so it shows a bit more of that reality. So Vibe, Sideways, New Superman of China, and something like that. Even the small little bits. And I don't recommend any of the comics he's been in, but something like Bunker, where he's very flamboyant and he's openly proud about his sexuality, but he's also like comes from a small Mexican village, and he's also in touch with that and with his religion, all that kind of stuff. It's something that's a melange, so it's interesting to get into it. And the character was done in such a loving and heartfelt way by Lobdell, despite being in really awful comics, really awful teen comics. So it's not something that you can really see overall. And that's what really gets me when you have stuff like America and you have stuff like Fireman 2, where you only sort of, you play against it and it just turns out kind of racist and kind of stereotypical of all these unfortunate implications tied to it that you didn't need to if you were just taking the lightest bit of sense. And that's all you need. You just need to have some common sense in how to treat these characters as actual characters with the prerequisite backstory. I'm not saying that every single Hispanic or minority or cultural character has the same backstory, but you have to think about what this would mean. You know, you can't just make a character brown and call him Puerto Rican and just kind of make him spout random Spanish. All right? When it turns out they're a fucking alien from altered dimension that is nothing like anything Hispanic other than the names and the language. So you can't do that. All right? You have to think about the actual legwork involved to make them at least kind of full. The same shorthand doesn't work. So yeah, read Vibe, read Sideways, read New Superman, read the Bunker's small little panels. All right, I wouldn't recommend the entirety of his Teen Titan comics, but stuff like that. And I'm interested in Border Town, and I hope that Border Town ends up being just what I need, because I'm definitely interested in it. I hope it succeeds. Our second question comes from the Illuminated, who is probably I'm a huge fan of, and I'm honored that he would even ask a question. And I'm honored by all questions, but this one I never expected, because Illuminated is such a busy person and no one knows about them. Then you definitely need to check out both his Tumblr page for this long and very, very hilarious series of Marvel event parody comics. They started out with Hickman's Avengers run and leading into Secret Wars. And then they also have another actual website for their own webcomic called Mad Magic, which is a really hilarious sort of horror comedy comic about just what if being a witch and wizard didn't pan out as an actual career choice or an actual education choice, and what do you do then? So it's just a really great one, and I'll add both links to both the parodies and to Mad Magic below, and I definitely recommend checking them out. They're both fantastic. And Illuminated questions is, what is my favorite comic book adaptation and how does it compare to the original? And this is a hard question because there are so many, and my stance on adaptations has always been enjoyability first, accuracy second, because that's all you can expect. I've always been that it has to work as a solid cinematic experience, and in that sense Ang Lee's Hulk is my favorite comic book movie. And I know that it goes against a little bit. People will be jumping toward, but what about the comic pages, transitions, and goofy stuff like the Gamma Dog? And I'm like, yeah, those are things that I can't defend because they're pretty too much goofy. But the rest of that movie is a thrilling family drama, which is completely taken from Peter David's run about the abusive father of Bruce Banner and that whole family just dynamic that collapsed and was such a traumatic experience for young Bruce, and all this immensely and incredibly tear-jerking stuff that Ang Lee did for that movie. And it's such an amazing movie. It's like the characters like Eric Bana as Bruce and Jennifer Connelly as Betty are just so good, and they're just so fantastically played and written. And some of these sequences, a little bit more awkward and far out sequences that play a little bit more visually, they're still good. Like, they're still so engaging visually, and they're so inventive, and the deeper sort of meanings of what they mean for the characters and character arcs and mentalities of these people in this story are still very solid, and I love it. Not something that I loved the first time. As a kid, Hulk was the first Marvel comic I started getting into with the old essentials of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's run, and I always wanted something a bit more action-packed. And this definitely wasn't that. I was very young when I watched it, and I hated it immediately. Then I rewatched it like a couple of years ago, and it definitely got to me. It is just such an enthralling movie. It's still one of the best Marvel movies that anyone has done because it plays everything to the hilt. It doesn't let up. It doesn't hold your hand. It always plays up the suspense, the tension, the drama, traumatic experiences. It's totally about that whole PTSD quotient. I definitely love it. How does it stack up to the comics? Like I said, it's completely different from like the old school Kirby and Lee stuff. But in regards to Peter David's run, it just takes that aspect of it, the abusive aspect, that whole suspenseful and family drama aspect, and sort of makes that the core, and it just kind of cuts out a lot of the more levity and a lot of the more action-y and just overall more light. It'll come at the same thing, but it's definitely two different tones and atmospheres. So I enjoy both almost equally. I have to give it to the movie because the movie, I'm just rediscovering it, and it's definitely on my top of my list if I ever had to make any list like this. Anyway, that was a fun question. I definitely recommend people, if you've seen Hulk, if you haven't seen Hulk in ages, or if you saw it very young, I implore you to revisit it and to give it a second chance. You know, if you can look past the transitions and some of the more goofy aspects, Eric Bana does a great job. Sam Elliott does a fantastic job. Nick Nolte does such an amazing and heartfelt job. And some of the smaller, even kind of dated things, like the entire final battle being in like a thunderstorm and you only see like flashes of it every couple of seconds, it still works. It still means a lot. It still gets at you, or at least it got at me. That's the last lines that David Banner says to his son and all that stuff. It's just so heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking movie. I love it. I love it. Anyway, that's it for this week. As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for everybody who has given their support these past 2 months, for giving their questions. All of this, it would not be possible without you. I would not be doing this. I would have given up, and I would just let this kind of fade away in history. And it means a lot to me. It really does. Thank you so much. All right, so if you want to submit your own questions, comments, or topics for discussion, please tweet at me at below where I have the links, or I'll tell you right now at THE_SNICKMAN. And as always, special thanks to at DOTEMCEE for their production of this cover art. It's amazing, and you can see the link below in that description as well. Also with the 2 time codes and links to Illuminated's works. Thank you for these 2 months, and see you next week.